What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another charcoal only tutorial where today we're going to go ahead and draw this duckling design. Now if you've ever done one of my bird tutorials, this kind of setup will be very sort of familiar for you. Now today's requirements, of course there is a palette, it's just a couple of grey tones and black, and there's also a link to a photograph that you're going to want to go ahead and open in your web browser of choice. I'll guide you through the first part, which is setting up our canvas with our drawing guide and setting the photograph on the left hand side to the correct size, editing the photograph as well to emphasize the shadows and highlights, and then we get into the sketching phase. Now if you don't want to do the sketching phase, which by the way is where we go ahead and use the grid system here and the grid system over here, which is mirrored, and then we draw out the duckling, sketching it out, and then go ahead and see how it compares by dragging it over the top of the photo and just seeing how close we get and then refining and refining. However, if you don't want to do that, you can just simply go ahead and download my guide, and then you'll have the sketch that I use here, and you can skip that part of the tutorial. So use the timestamps down below to jump to the point where we get started with the charcoals. Now it's really important to note that this particular tutorial goes through a bit of an ugly stage. We start off with some grey tones, we then do shadow tones in here, and they're still super loose and not very sharp. But it's right at the very end where we do all of this erasing here, where this really comes to life. So you just need to stick at it through that ugly phase and make your way right towards the end. And then at the very end as well is where I show you how you can just crop the canvas, get rid of the photograph and image on the left-hand side, and then you've got something you can share on socials if you need to. Make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them, like Instagram or Facebook. And make sure to subscribe, of course, to the channel. If you could help me out, that'd be amazing by subscribing. I've been posting weekly Procreate tutorials here on my YouTube channel for the last 4 years. So make sure you don't miss out on all of that content. And if you want even more tutorials from me, I post 3 more every single month that are exclusive to my Patreon supporters. And they've now got a catalogue of over 130 exclusive tutorials. And as I said, 3 are added every single month. So that catalogue just continues to grow. I'll leave links to everything in the description down below. And again, that is where you're going to find a link to the requirements section as well. So make sure to grab all of the requirements for today's design. It will take you over to a post over on Patreon, and then you'll have everything you need in order to get started. So with that said, let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, you're going to want to go ahead and go up to your actions. You're going to want to go to the canvas tab, and you're going to want to grab a drawing guide. Let's edit that drawing guide, and we're going to want to set it to the option here of 425 and hit the option of done. And hit done again. And then that way you should have a grid that at least nicely has 3 rows across. Now we want to go ahead and go to our layer here. We want to go ahead and go to our color and just double check that in our disk, we just have it set to black at the bottom. If we go to our selection tool and we turn on the option of color fill and we use the option of rectangle, we want to drag across until as best you can, you hit that halfway point of your canvas, and then tap on your selection tool when you're done. So when you let go, you've just filled in the shape with the color. Now, what we're then going to do is create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it to the shape ready to go. And then if we go to Google Chrome, for example, where I've got the photograph for today, we're going to go ahead and hold down on it. We're going to copy the image. So we're going to hold down, go to copy image, swipe back to Procreate, and then swipe down with 3 fingers and go to the option of paste. We want to allow paste. And we want to go ahead and tap on one of the nodes on the outside to make sure you've got uniform selected. And you want to change the dimensions to 941. So 941 there. It will scale it up in size. And then we're going to go ahead and just move it until we end up sort of with the duck in the center of our canvas looking all beautiful and pretty. So we'll just put that roughly around about here so that that line runs into the corner there of the kind of beak area. And then tap on your cursor when you're done. Then what we want to do is go up to our adjustments. We want to go to hue, saturation and brightness, get rid of all the saturation, then tap on your adjustments again and again and go to curves. And we want to go ahead and increase the highlights and the shadows. So I want to go ahead and drag the highlights across the top here to roughly around about here, and then bring the shadows equally in the same kind of amount. So say here, for example, we want quite a lot of contrast today. And then we're going to tap on our adjustments when we're done. Now it's really important to know that at this stage, we're going to go ahead and try ourselves manually to sketch out our duck here. However, if you don't want to do that, you're going to need to go ahead and download the PNG of the stencil that I eventually make, and go up to your actions and go to the option of add and insert the photo and position it right over here on the right hand side in the same sort of position to that. However, if you want to go ahead and do the sketch phase with me, we want to go ahead and create a new layer. We'll go ahead and go to our brush. We'll go to the option of sketching, and I like to use the Procreate pencil. I'm going to set the opacity to around about, say, 40%, and the size it probably wants to be quite small just to get started with. So I'm going to go a little bit bigger than that, maybe around about 4%. And you want to look at the grid and work out roughly where about everything is. So, for example, I reckon just around about here's where we could get started with drawing out the beak. And all I'm going to do is just try my best to match up accordingly to the grid on the opposite side and then draw out the whole of the duck bit by bit. And again, as before, just using the kind of grid system as a guide for my sort of general sketch here of this whole part of the process. So just take your time to do this kind of part. And if you want to, and you get a bit stressed, you can of course always use mine that I provided. Now, roughly once you've got a general sort of sketch for the outline, I recommend going to the layer, swiping it to the left and duplicating it, tap on it and just alpha lock it, and then go to your color and grab, say, like a bright pink, and then just go back to the layer, tap on it and fill it so you can see all the bright color. Then grab your cursor and just move it across. And if you turn on snapping here in the bottom left, when you move it across, you'll get these 3 blue lines, which lets you know you've moved perfectly horizontal. And then once you've kind of got over to here, you want to kind of pick a point that you think is roughly the same kind of positioning, and then tap on your cursor and then just take a look and say, okay, well, actually I need to point the beak up and I need to sort of bring the area here down. You can almost use this as a type of review and likewise push these out. So you can go backwards and forwards and you can just make adjustments. So I could say, right, okay, I can leave that where it is if I really wanted to and go back to my sketch and then use my eraser and say, well, clearly at the bottom here, I need to really tuck this up quite a bit more. So I can just use the soft airbrush just to kind of tidy it up. I'll go back to black and grab my brush again and then just keep adjusting. And then you can try then just to slowly but surely sort of home in your skills a little bit. And then you can equally kind of identify, well, hang on, I actually know I can sort of block in a bit of a sort of blueprint for myself now by saying, hang on, there's a lot of dark tone here and that kind of wraps around here and into this area here. And I can just try and sort of lay out a little bit foundationally, roughly where all the kind of dark tones are. They come over and in towards that eye shape here. The head's looking okay in terms of the actual sort of general shaping. These positioning of these elements might be a little bit off. Of course, I know that the sort of beak area is off a tiny bit, but I can adjust that in a second. But you're just taking a look, seeing what you can sort of plan in based on the shapes that you can see, and just try and sort of get your sketch ready. And likewise, for example, I would go ahead and use this gray line here and just say, okay, let's just put in a little line here. That kind of gives me an indication roughly where it could be. You could even make it like a bit of a squiggle if you really wanted to. Now, of course, I could go multiple rounds here, keep adjusting as I go. However, the alternative, of course, is to delete that layer and delete the pink one. And if you are going to go ahead and do something like this where you want to draw from a reference, the alternative is just to do this. You just grab a brand new layer, go across, create a sort of blueprint sort of design for yourself to kind of follow, and then just sort of use that instead. You don't always have to sort of draw and sort of home in on that kind of aspect of it, of drawing and really replicating what you can see bit by bit. You can just go ahead and just use a reference, because the majority of this tutorial is not necessarily going to be the fact of sort of drawing and sort of laying out this sketch. This sketch just simply gets us started. You want to go ahead and just remember that this is a charcoal based kind of tutorial, and all you need to do is just make sure that you're prepared for that part of it. You don't need to sort of sit and sort of sketch out necessarily if you don't want to. So I'm just going to very quickly keep isolating all of these elements, and we'll be back in a second. Now, if you are going to go ahead and itemize each element like I've just done, just make sure you put like a little dot down here. You can't see it, but also a dot in the corner there, a dot in the top left, and a dot at the top there too. Just so that what you can do is you can just go ahead and grab your cursor. You can then go ahead and drag this across to the right hand side, and it should just nicely match up then in terms of this general sort of body of a shape to these elements here. and then tap on your cursor when you're done. So at this stage, you have either gone ahead and drawn that and sketched it multiple times. You've either done the outline effect like I've just done there on top, where we just simply sketch over the top of the image, or you have gone ahead and added in the image, but we should all be at the same point now. And this is just the fun part. This is where we can really start to enjoy the charcoal effects. So I'm going to tap on here and I'm going to go ahead and bring the opacity down of the layer down to about 20%. What we'll then do is go ahead and create like a general kind of sort of charcoal wash almost to start with. It's just like a backdrop color. So we'll create a new layer and drag it underneath your guide, tap on it and unclip it if it clips itself to the left, and rename your guide as well while we're here and call it guide. Now the layer underneath, you're going to want to go ahead and go to your colors and grab the top left of the palette, this light gray here. The brush of choice today is going to be the option under charcoals of the 6B compressed. I've got it set to 50% opacity and I've got a few different markers, but the first one we will use is just a 51% marker here. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of very lightly with your pressure, just kind of box in a general sort of coat of some gray in here. Try to leave the outside edges not sort of distant from the actual edge of the Procreate canvas as well. You don't want to add in too much. And then just a very light coat. We're then going to go ahead and smudge it. So we want to tap on our smudge tool, tap on it, and we're going to use airbrushing and the soft blend option. I've got the opacity set to 44%. Sizes will vary a lot, but for something like a background here, you could use something like 16%. Now I want to show you something really cool. If you go up to your actions and go to the option of preferences, if we go to gesture controls, if we go to the option here of smudge, there's a couple of things you can turn on. You can turn on touch, and you can also turn on this option here alternatively. I'll show you what this does. So if I go ahead and hit done, if I then, for example, carry on drawing and I say, right, I just want to smudge now, watch this. I can just use my finger as if it was real charcoal and smudge the whole thing like so. How cool is that? And then I can just go back in, layer in some more color and just use it as if it was real life. How cool is that? Now, the only thing to bear in mind is with something like this is that false touches potentially, you might get an accidental smudge here and there, especially if you're not using something like a drawing brush, drawing glove. So just bear that in mind, but you want a nice little coat of light gray like this. And then occasionally a little sort of more purposeful little grains in there will look cool, but just leave it quite sort of simple for the most part. I'll just add in a tiny bit through the bird a bit more and then smudge with my finger like so. Awesome. So let's go ahead and carry on then. So the first stage is just to lay in what I'm going to refer to as kind of medium shadows. We're going to go through the shadow phase together, and then we're going to go ahead and then just add highlights at the end. So it will look quite quirky for quite some time, but just trust the process. Now I'm going to create a separate layer just for the actual bird itself. I'm going to go to my colors and grab the bottom of these two colors, the middle of the first column. Brush, of course, still wants to be 6B. Except we're going to get quite small now. We want to be about 4% on the sizing and use the photograph on the left. So although I've laid this all out, you do want to take a look and say, right, okay, let's start at the back here. That's got a nice little bit of light gray. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to bring my guide even lower down. I don't want it to sort of take center stage too much. I've dropped it down to 6%. I'm just going to add in some charcoal here. I'm pressing very, very lightly. We don't need to press too firm at the beginning. Now the light wash equally acts as kind of some sort of general colouring to the bird as well, that sort of general background colour we just introduced. So it fills in all the gaps now with a nice light grey, which is what we want. We don't want any kind of gaps of nothing. Now here I'm just going to go ahead and darken up, following suit with the bird, and you should just about be able to see my guide there. I will bring it up for you just a little bit so you can see it a little bit more, probably easier to follow, about 12% now for you. And then I'll just darken up in here. And I'm just blocking in this kind of color here at this stage. And this area here, of course, wants to be quite dark in here. So I do want to kind of pound in the sort of the charcoal here. And we are going to do some smudging in a second. Underneath here, it looks like in this area here, we've got a little bit of sort of gray dark tones. And again, we're not doing our darkest shadows. So some of these need to be bigger than what they actually appear, and you don't want to be detailing anything at this stage either. So just get your colors in, get all of that blocked in, and just fade that out on the left. You know, you can blend, of course. You do want to kind of take control to that degree. So I'm just fading out a few of those colors. Don't worry about the white tones. Again, we're going to add white right at the very end. So this will all absolutely pop. We'll go ahead and just darken up a little bit more in the body of that and bring it a bit closer. I'm then going to go ahead and really point my pen quite down here to get quite a sharp point. So you can point quite far down into the screen, and that'll give you the much more sort of precise shaping to the brush. Go in there, we'll darken up the eye. I'll zoom in a little bit because I can see, of course, from the guide, I've got a little bit of a kind of little route here through in towards the eye, and then wrap that round at the top. And of course, don't forget that, again, these are general shadows. We're not trying to do all of the darkest tones only. At the minute, we actually want to be sort of factoring in a lot of different elements. For example, in the face here, you see there's this light tone that goes over the top of the eye, and then there's this grey patch here. Let's factor that in. You know, we want to be factoring in those types of elements in ours as well. So yes, we'll go ahead and just make sure that the eye's got a good amount of shaping to it. And then we're going to go over the top. I'm going to put some grey in there. I'm going to kind of bring that backwards a little bit. I'm just going to kind of just adjust that shape a tiny bit. Give that a little bit on there. And then there's a light patch followed by a tiny dark patch that comes off of the nose there too. And we want to darken that up for a minute. So I'm just going to kind of bring that across just for a second into that kind of triangular shape here. And then we've got the little corner of the eye as well to introduce. So potentially you may want to make your brush ever so slightly smaller if you want to. If you're thinking you need to be way more precise, I wouldn't stress it at this part, to be honest. And then I'm going to go ahead and very lightly just tip my pen on its side because I do need to give some general sort of colouring in here. And then get back in there and just keep darkening up little areas that are kind of those mid-tones. It's quite a tricky kind of process, this one, because you do need to add in more than what sort of appears in the sort of the image. If you look here, these are all grey, these areas. So we need to be making sure, of course, that they are grey. We'll come back to the dark tones shortly. You know, I'm just darkening up under here, and then I can see that like it joins into this kind of triangular dark shape there and goes sort of up and over. Just keeping my pressure nice and light so I don't overdo it. Now just packing in some grey in there too. Bring in some grey underneath. I definitely need to go ahead and just make sure that the underside there has got a good bit of darkness. And what's really, really, really important is we are not trying to match this bird or this photograph pixel for pixel. Not at all. We are just going to have some fun today with a fun little exercise. You do not need to stress about adding in pixel for pixel sort of perfection for that at all. That's no fun. That's no good at all. And you should never put that pressure on yourself too much. It's still going to look fantastic by the end, but it's going to be our version. We can have some fun with it. Now notice here how I'm just darkening up there, and then I'm just leaving a bit of a gap where that light tone sits there. You know, I don't have to necessarily sort of factor that in just yet, but it is there just in case. And then underneath the sort of the face there, I'm just going to go ahead and just darken that up. Get some more colour. There's a nice little dark patch just there too, so I'm just going to make sure that is ever so slightly darker, and then it wraps underneath, leaves a tiny little light patch. This general shape here is quite dark. Now that is why we also did the curves part of this sort of edit to this image, because that helps us really just kind of exaggerate the highlights and shadows. It helps us really understand that they are just like very dark areas, or they're very grey areas, or they're highlights. We don't need to know anything sort of more than that necessarily. You're kind of exaggerating those shadows and making it very obvious to the eye where everything is. I'm just going to bring the size down to 2% while I just very quickly connect in the underside here. And that just needs to kind of run along there. And I'm going to darken up the top here, that top part of the beak into the corner or the end there. And then wrap that, of course, over the top along here. This is a very dark area, so we do need to just pack the charcoal in here for the moment. A little bit more on the underside there. Again, the whole area is pretty dark, so we don't need to be worrying about it for now. Now, one thing you can do is, because we're going to slowly get darker and darker, you can tap on your guide and invert it to white, potentially even increase the opacity should you need to of your guide, and then go back to your charcoal layer just to triple check, you are getting the right shaping of everything, you're connecting everything that should be, and everything sort of starts to look a little bit more realistic because you've got the line work in there to sharpen things. Now, we're going to go ahead and smudge. Now, you don't have to do the sort of finger gesture there. You can just tap on smudge. You can just set the brush, for example, down to 4%. The settings will have remained, but it's just an option if you want to have that kind of fun, more realistic kind of effect to this. So we're just going to start smudging in and blending. That's the most important part. It's not so much just smudging for the sake of it. It's just creating blends and kind of gradients. So I want to kind of darken up under here. And then I want to, if you take a look here, it just nicely grays out. Even though it's a very dark patch, it does kind of just very quickly sort of spill and blend underneath. So you've got a nice little bit of color there. I'm just going to blend this out on the back of here as well, just pushing that across. Moving into this area here, the back there, definitely want to make sure that's nice and smudged. I can just basically run the pen up and down there, smudging that out quite a lot. Here as well, off this tiny little wing, we can maybe just sort of blend out a little bit at the bottom, so all those dark tones kind of just fade into one another. And you don't really want any kind of sharp elements just yet. The light tones that we'll introduce at the very end will be your light tones. So for now, you kind of want to just take a look at it and try and sort of set the blueprint for the later on, but just give yourself some general coloring underneath. Here, I'm just going to very lightly just smudge all of the kind of details that I put in the face, not sort of pushing them too far around though. In the very darkest bits, such as at the very top there of the head, you don't want to be smudging them too much. Likewise, the eye, you still need a little bit of sort of quite precision looking shapes in there. Smudging down there underneath the eye. And then I'll go back to my brush and maybe just think about, hang on, can I get some grey in there? I can go ahead and maybe sort of redefine some areas as well if I feel like they're getting a little bit lost in the smudging. And that's fun. This part here should be quite fun just to go back and then keep refining and seeing what other bits you can get. But as I said, this is probably going to be like a bit of an ugly stage to it. I'm just smudging again, by the way, just to get those last little bits smudged in. I will just blend these two a tiny bit by doing a little tap and drag, a little motion there, and maybe just a tiny bit of softening on the very edge, like so. And I think the only adjustment would be then to just maybe push down a little bit in that gap, like so. So you should end up with a little something like this. If not, then just spend a bit more time just defining again some of these really dark areas here, like around the top of the head, just maybe emphasizing things a bit more than maybe just comes to the eye naturally. Get in there and kind of just take a little bit more of a sort of artistic liberty to do so. And I'm just going to kind of add in a bit of grey just here, just wrapping around there. Again, the highlights is right at the very end, and this is where it all really comes together. So let's leave it as that, because I could definitely spend a lot longer. Let's carry on into the darkest tones. So on the same layer, just go to your colors and grab the black color here, top of the second column, and then we just crack on. Now, I do urge you, in this type of design, I would normally swipe this layer to the left and duplicate it. I'd turn off the bottom one. I'd rename the bottom one, and I always call it BU. Now, BU for me stands for backup. If I absolutely hate the dark tones that I add in, I've got my backup, I can go back. So I always work on then the new one, and I keep the old one. That's just part of my process, and maybe that's something you'll equally find quite easy to use, just in case you want to revert back. So we're going to carry on, brush back to what it was before, and we're just going to start darkening up. So I'm going to start down here on the wing. And of course, we've got some lovely dark tones now to be working with. I've got the brush currently set to the 2% marker here. It should be quite nice and easy for me to do that. Now, I'm not purposely trying to draw in sort of feathers at all, but I am taking a look a little bit now for how things move and flow across the body of our little duckling here. So I'm just darkening up across the bottom, and I'm just going to kind of see that they do kind of blend round a little bit. So maybe I'll just tip my pen on its side and just add in a bit of a blend of some dark tone in there. but making sure that the kind of body of this dark area here, nice and dark. And of course, you kind of want to show that kind of wing shape there. It then kind of moves around into here, where of course it's very, very dark in here. And then at the bottom, it just fades out. So I'm just going to tip my pen slightly more on its side and just blend that out into there. We're going to move underneath there. And of course, you've got a guide as well to help you and aid you through that process. So just a little bit of dark tone there. It's quite a lot darker here as well. And this rear wing over here is quite dark. It's just got light feathers over the top, which makes it kind of look like it's lighter than it is. So I'm just going to darken up over there. We've got a lovely dark patch here on the kind of chest area. So I'm going to tip my pen on its side and kind of just blend in some dark tone here. Have fun with the charcoals, mess around with them, get expressive with them. I'm going to kind of blend in a bit of a fade there, just to kind of fade in, because it clearly sort of gets quite light grey in here almost, and then just fades across here. So I'm just going to fade that a bit more by tipping pen on its side a bit more. And then let's go up the rear of the head. So here it wants to be fairly sort of tipping sort of downwards with your brush, seeing what kind of dark tone you can get in there. Of course, you've got this little kind of triangular little patch here in the face. Put that in play. We're going to go up and around, along into the eye area. The eye, you just want to get in there, just darken up that as like a good circular kind of shape, followed by the little bit that comes off the end there as well. And equally, if we take a look at the photograph, you end up with this tiny little kind of area here as well. So just a little triangular patch there. Connect these two together like so, and then darken up over the top. Let's then equally go ahead and just darken up in here. And you can see it's darker here where it meets the light tone. So towards the bottom of that little area, you kind of want to be a bit more precise, and then fade that out by just blending it, tipping your pen on its side, just to add in that darker tone like so. We're going to zoom out, we're going to take a look. So for example, just underneath here, there's a bit of a dark lining here that I can see. So I'm just going to tip my pen a little bit further down, adding in a little bit of a dark patch there maybe, and just tipping my pen a bit more so I can get some exaggerated shadows a bit more. A little bit darker over the eye, of course, so I am going to go ahead and sort of bring that into play a bit more. Again, all we're doing is just getting ready for those highlight tones, because they're going to really pop off. There's a dark line that separates the sort of top there as well. There's a line that runs up the head. And then under here, we end up with this quite cute looking, almost like just smile-like shape here to me. I don't know why. And then underneath, we'll just run in the dark tone. I'm just keeping the beak as close to the side as possible. It's also a really good exercise because it prevents you from zooming in too much, which is really good because we can get lost in that too much sometimes. We'll go along there. And then I know these are slightly lighter tones, so we're going to try and accommodate for them a little bit. We're just going to darken up on the top of the beak all the way to the very end. And then we're going to bring that down the top part. And then it kind of links up into that little circular shape there as well. And draw that circular shape in. And then of course there's this lovely little dark patch on top of the beak as well. Lovely. And just a little bit of blend here and there, again to exaggerate the darkness if possible. Will look lovely. And I'm just going to keep going with the eye a tiny bit more. I just want to make sure that the eye is nice and precise. And you can always turn off your guide as well, just to get an idea for it. Just to triple check how things are coming along, where your kind of colors are. Do you need to exaggerate any of them a little bit more? There's like a little kind of white patch there that makes its way up. And then there's also a little kind of drop down here. So again, even though we don't want to sort of make sure we match up perfectly, we of course want to try to see what things we can pick out. So for example, here I'm just roughing up this kind of edge now because it dips in here, and then we end up with a little kind of extra little bit of sort of unevenness, which is where the structures all tend to sort of fall apart a little bit. A little bit of darkness under there, a little bit of darkness in this kind of little patch here too. And it looks like there's a little bit of something just in here. I'm going to blend that in like so. And let's go ahead and actually blend it as well. So you can go ahead and grab your smudge tool and just get in there and just try and sort of break down certain areas here at the back. I will just kind of, with a slight circular motion, just trying to sort of blend out that dark tone towards the rear. And then also likewise, I'll put a little bit of blending in here too. Let's maybe just blend the edge of this. Because the opacity is set quite low, you can go back over yourself a few times. It won't be too strong, hopefully too fast. I do want to go ahead and sort of make sure that the underside here is nice and dark, because there is a nice dark area here. In fact, I might even get back in here with the brush and just kind of just show how that really does wrap under there. And then there's this kind of triangular shape here. Now I'll grab my smudge tool and just smudge that in under there, and seeing what we can just soften where necessary. Or something like that. That's looking really nice. Quite dark in here, but again, it just helps your highlights shortly, just to really have something to stand off of. Now at this stage, I want to go ahead and do part of the sort of design where we start to border our work a little bit. And again, just if you want to, swipe it to the left, duplicate it, turn off the bottom one, and rename that one too, and call it BU as backup, just in case you need to go back. It's totally up to you. These are just things that I do, and I like to share them with you. Now on this layer that we're actually working on, we're going to go ahead and go to our colors and grab the middle of the first column. Your brush wants to start off a tiny bit bigger, I reckon around about say 17%. And you want to just start to draw in a bit of a kind of dark tone around the back. Now we're doing this because in a minute when we add all these lovely bright highlights, you need something for them to stand off of, and you need a contrasting background. So we're going to go ahead and kind of just outline our duck a little bit. I'm going to bring the brush size down to 12% so I can be a bit tighter to the actual bird. I'm going to get right close in behind there, and you can go right up to the very edge of it and touch it. That's perfectly fine. You just want to make sure first of all that you do get that kind of outline shape in there. Try not to lose the bird too much in their mind, but get very, very close where possible. And it doesn't matter if you end up then with like a 1 or 2 pixel kind of gap. I actually quite like that. I think it makes it kind of look as if the bird's got this kind of glow effect around it, and I find that quite pleasant. So you may equally do that too. So I'm just darkening up around here. And as I make my way down here, I'll kind of just let the brush get its sort of definition back a little bit by pressing a little bit lighter. Then I'll set the brush size a bit bigger, say 20%, and then I'll go over my line there and then start to blend out towards the edges, giving the design then a little bit of kind of texture again. And then just some light strokes across the top of the screen that kind of indicate maybe the water in behind. So we're just trying to introduce like a bit of a backdrop to our scene at the same time. So like I'm just going to draw in some lines, and I'm just making sure hopefully that that border around the bird is also equally quite sort of faint at the same time. So a little something maybe like this, and then just bring in a little bit down here too, going across, and then a little bit around the edge, followed by like a little bit that comes in here. Now we're saving the middle because we're going to bring in a reflection of the bird shortly. I'm going to go down to around about a 10% and just see if I can add in some lines in there though, that maybe sort of demonstrate that it's water potentially around the edge of the bird. And overall, that's what we should be aiming for. Let's then smudge this. So let's go ahead and go to our smudge. In fact, I will use my finger for it, but I will go to the smudge tool and just make sure that the size is set to something a bit bigger, something around about, say, the 10% marker. I'm just going to smudge out the edges over here, just giving my design a nice softer look to it. But also it's going to really help, as I said, the contrast. Contrast is key to making things look quite pleasant to the eye a lot of the time. People overdo it, and we're going to try not to do that, but we're just smudging the design as we go, seeing what we can come up with. Push inwards again. Don't go too close to the edge of the canvas, in my opinion. You don't want to have it running all the way off. Now, I'll show you in a second, if you do that, how you can fix it. And also try to sort of preserve a little bit of your kind of charcoaly sort of detailing and sort of texture. Now, if you do go too close to the edge, all it is an eraser. Tap on the eraser and use the soft brush under airbrushing. Set your size to like an 8% and just make sure you go down here and just kind of just give yourself a bit of a gap on the edge. It's just a personal preference at the same time. Now go back to your brush, go back to your color and change it to the black at the top of the second column. The size, we'll keep it around about that kind of, let's go to about that sort of 10 to 15% range. And again, just around the edge of the bird, we're going to go ahead and just start adding in some quite dark contrast in here now. So you're going to go round, just darkening up trying to kind of also equally at the same time kind of create like random patterns off to the edges, as if like, again, water ripples in the distance, like on the water surface, because all we're doing is essentially adding in a background at this stage. So look, a little bit of a dark line up here. I'm not going to go too close in certain areas with this dark tone. I don't want it to get too sort of heavily bordered. For example, I won't go around the beak there too much because it is a dark color anyway. But I'll go down here and then adding in some little patches of something around the edges. Maybe a little bit over here for balance, maybe. And again, we'll just smudge it. So we'll just grab our finger and just smudge across, smudging that all out. Bring the size down if you need to. So you can use your brush, you can use your finger. It's totally up to you. You can go to your smudge tool, bring that down. Bring it down to like a 4% and then just smudge. It's just a little bit of fun. I hope it's something maybe new for you that you maybe haven't seen in Procreate before, that smudge technique. Quite fun, makes it quite nice and realistic almost. And especially if you're going to somewhat sort of focus on charcoals entirely, and that was your thing, that would be amazing. That'd be so much fun to sort of play with all the time. I'm just going to smudge the background quite close to the bird in there too. And I'm going to get quite close on the underside as well here on this edge. I think I can just about smudge all that out. So this is the stage now where we start to bring this to life and really go for it. Now what we will do is we'll go ahead and where we've got our little wash in the background, we want to bring that up, and as long as it's underneath the layer that you can see with all the ductwork on it, just pinch the two together. And then we're going to go ahead and just erase. So just like real life, you just erase just to bring out highlights again. We're going to tap on our eraser. We're going to tap on it. We're going to use the medium brush. We want to have a opacity set to 50 and also 20 at the same time. And we want a size that's very, very small, probably like a 1 to 2%. What we're now going to do is we're going to take a look at the bird and isolate the areas that are very bright and highlighty. For example, let's start here. This area here is blatantly quite a lot lighter. So all we're doing now is erasing from the image. So like a 1%, there's going to be variations in the 1%, but this is your final stage of this. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and just run this underneath, and I'm creating lots and lots of these drag-like lines here for the kind of fluffiness of the bird and all of its little kind of very soft-looking feathers. So I'm going to go ahead and run this across this sort of dark wing on the rear here, and then don't do too many kind of super fine lines to start with. Kind of get your blocked highlight in, which is this. As it comes down here, it gets a lot whiter. So I'm starting at 20% opacity because I just prefer being able to build up multiple layers of sort of color tone in here. And also you can just slowly but surely get to your details. You don't need to rush it in any way. That highlight kind of runs into here as well. So you could kind of start to think about, okay, well, I can bring in, you're looking for the flow of the feathers at this point. Then they start to kind of point down a little bit in here. And then they've got lots of little patches in here. And you can press quite firm. You can press quite lightly. You can bring up the opacity if you want to get quite dark tones in there. But you're just trying to show and sort of dictate where the flow of the feathers are around the bird. So while I've got you, if you could do me a solid and subscribe to the channel, that would be amazing. I have been posting a weekly tutorial here on my YouTube channel now for over 4 years, once every week for 4 years. That's awesome. So it's quite an achievement, something I'm very proud of. And if you want to come and join me every week for a new tutorial, just make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. And I hope you're enjoying the content. Now, don't be afraid, by the way, to switch it to 50 and just see what kind of super sharp, bright lines you can get in here. So we've got all these kind of fluffy edges here of the bird, and then you can get in there lots of little taps and drags in here. So I'm looking at this area here, for example, and I know there's a lot of white tone in there, so I can just start to build that up. I'm going to go ever so slightly bigger with the brush, and I'm going to go back down to 20. I like the build up process. And the brush, you can make it like a 2%, a very small 2%, because there's multiple in there, of course, but just take your time. Don't overdo it. Try not to take a shortcut here. It just won't look as good. So I'm just adding in lots and lots of little details. But again, this is where it really starts to take shape. So once I've kind of got like a bit of a plan in there as to what's happening, I can go ahead and make the brush like 50%. and say, again, the 1, of course. And we can start just adding in some detailing there in the chest, and some like lines, of course, that look slightly different to each other will look fantastic, because then you'll end up with that variety of like sharpness. I'm going to keep going across now. Let's take a look here. Look at how these feathers then go across here. They go down, 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 oh, and then start to take shape and go that way. That's what we need to dictate now to the person looking at this. So we can do exactly that. We can just start to angle some of those quite quickly, like quite horizontal and streaky almost, and how they kind of flow out of that area across. Some very light ones. Keep your pressure nice and light if you can manage it. But also don't be afraid to really emphasize a few little ones here and there, because we are sort of trying to sort of work in a sort of style to this at the same time. We're not trying to necessarily have like a perfect representation again of what the bird looks like. We are trying to have this kind of fun, very pretty, quite pleasing aesthetic to this kind of charcoal style design today. So don't be afraid to just exaggerate things and really get in there and show like a bright line occasionally here and there that just goes across those dark tones, because they are there, but you can just turn them up to 100%. I'm just going across there. Here is a really interesting part, because here we've got this kind of much needed kind of light patch in here. So I can just get in there and just squiggle my pen. If you take a look at that line that I'm drawing in here, I'm just keeping it very, very kind of squiggly almost. Trying my best just to keep it kind of matching with the rest and suit the rest of the design. And again, this whole part now could look a bit kind of almost doodly, to be honest, by the end, but it will look cool. So that's all that matters. So just lots of little scrape lines. Now, if you've ever done any of my bird tutorials, you'll know that this kind of last phase is the most important for me. I love adding in those kind of light tones at the very end, exaggerating certain areas and taking the design to that next level. I'm just adding in a few sort of long stray lines off the back of the head while I'm here, just to kind of show those sort of fluffy edges to the top there, and how it gets quite white in here. And even at the rear there, just some like little lines here and there, just little sort of scuff lines. Right off the rear of the bird as well, we could probably add like a few up there just to kind of maybe show the highlight wrapping round. And I wouldn't add too much there. This is generally the kind of impression that we want to give. And likewise, we also want to do the same for this area here while we're down here. So I can just about see how kind of feathery it is. And I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to set the opacity though to, let's go to something like 30. I'm going to go ever so slightly smaller with the brush size and just get in here. And I can see that there's quite a few that kind of stretch quite far. So if I keep my pressure nice and light, likewise the opacity, look at this effect that I'm building up. I can see so many light feathers, and we're just introducing grey tones. Because you're just erasing from that dark edge. And this is a prime example of exactly what we wanted to try and do here by adding in that dark border. You've got that dark border to erase from now and exaggerate highlights, and you've got somewhere to bring your highlights into. If we didn't have this dark tone here and you're drawing here, these highlights don't look anywhere near as sort of emphasized as the against the dark tone. So that's exactly what we wanted to achieve. And some of these really do stretch quite far away from the edge of the bird there. So I'm going to keep going. They tend to stick right underneath there, and they're very, very light. And then occasionally there's quite a sort of a bright one. And I say light in terms of they almost appear like I'd need to press very, very light with my pressure. A couple more little streaks in here. Some more across the front chest there. Lovely. Now, I don't want to overdo it necessarily just in this area just to start with, because I know that we've got such a long way to go now. Well, I say such a long way. We've got the face to do at the same time that I don't want to sort of sign myself up to too much with the face. You can always keep going though, of course, when you're done. So like, let's go ahead, for example, over the top of the head. It's so bright on the top of the head there that now again, we've got that lovely bright white tone to introduce right on top of that dark border. That's exactly what we were planning for. So we're going to draw in this little patch here. I'm going to try and blend it out though into here. Now, of course, when we share today's image, I'll show you how to do it at the very end. We're not going to share it with this photograph at the end here. So you're not going to need to see that when you share it. So whatever you draw is not going to be compared necessarily by you know, people seeing this on, say, Instagram, for example, you know, they're just going to see whatever you create. And that's really important. You're not, again, trying to replicate this bird absolutely bit for bit. You're just trying to have some fun with the sort of the style for today. So I'm just adding in all of these little flicks now that go up and over and onto that dark patch. And there's loads of them in there. You can be quite firm and, you know, really bulk them in. Here, for example, I've got a little bit of kind of white patch just there. And you can just scribble that in. Just scribble it in like so. Get that lovely patch in there and then blend it out. Of course, we're going to do the eye in just a second, but we're just going to carry on. A few more of these here, and you're just taking a look and say, well, that area there is blatantly the brightest. So as it kind of flicks up and over and onto there, that's going to be my brightest patch. I'm going to make the brush size a tiny bit bigger. I am going to bring the opacity up to 40% as well. I'm just going to kind of patch in here. Now look at all these little hairs. Let's go back down to a 1%, but let's go up to 50 and let's try and get some of those little hairlines in there. Feather lines, whatever you want to call it. I don't know necessarily. I don't really care either. It's just meant to sort of show the detail on there if possible. Zoom all the way out. Lovely. Flow of the whole fluff. The ducky fluff. Let's go over here. And then let's try and sort of break down this dark shape here with a few little sort of scrape lines underneath it. We've got a lovely little patch underneath the eye as well, so 1 to 2%. Get right up here. So I'm doing this little curve shape here. So I'm just wiggling my pen in there, and it can be very, very simple like this. Look at that. It's just a wiggle. Let's do the eye. Let's do the eye while we're here. So the eye is important, obviously, to just really set the sort of tone in terms of definition. The top of the eye there has a lovely line shape to it that goes all the way over the top. So I've got 1%. And when the second I draw that in, the shape of the eye and the sort of detail of it goes up 100%. There's another, if you take a look at the eye, inside the dark area, you've got this line here as well. So all you need to do is look for where your eye is and then just draw ever so slightly inside it. I'm going to go 1%, the smallest sort of 1%, to try and get that kind of line under there, like so. And then there's just, if you simplify this, it's just a triangular shape and one edge is slightly curved. So I don't even need to look at it. I can just set the brush size to like a 1%, curve line up here, and then just kind of create that triangular shape like so. Zoom all the way out, see what it looks like. Lovely. And from there, you want to go ahead and just, I want to make sure it curves here. Now, because we are on the same layer, if you want to make a change, it's just as simple as going back to your brush, setting your brush down to like a 2% and then just coloring it in. So let's just set the brush down to something very, very small, and I just need to darken up there because the shape of the eye changed ever so slightly based off the line that I drew underneath. So I've just drawn that in there and then go back to my eraser and just carry on detailing. We're going to take a look for all of the little patches here underneath, and I'm just erasing now. I'm going slightly bigger with the brush to like a larger 1%. Just all of these little lines across here. Lovely. Let's go into there too. There's a few off the rear there in this area here. So I'm just tapping, lots and lots of little taps, trying to add in all the little detail in there. I've got a little bit of a white patch there. There's like a little bit of a curve shape there, followed by some sort of little line here as well that I can see just about there almost, followed by equally like a few little, add in a few little taps here. There's a light patch just here too, and that again can just be as simple as a squiggle and a wiggle to erase into there. Just keeping it quite simple at that point, but look at how much contrast we're slowly building up as well. Let's move into the beak, because the beak's got so much reflection in there. There's kind of two layers to it. You've got this really super bright edge to it, so I could literally just take a look at it over there and say, okay, it just runs along that surface. So I can just brighten that up all the way into the end, make sure it's super nice and erased by going over it a few times. And then these areas here, we'll drop it down to 20%. And we'll just say, okay, cool, I know now I need to get into here. I'm going to make the brush size a tiny bit bigger. I'm going to get into these areas. Now, don't forget, you still got your guide. So turn on your guide because I did outline a few of these elements here. So if you don't want to eyeball it necessarily, you've got these kind of zones here that I've created for you. So you can go ahead and just add them in here, for example, a bit more like so. And then maybe once you've got a little bit of it, turn off your guide and then you can get in there and start to work in some eyeballing detail. So you don't have to always eyeball it. I'm going to go ahead and just draw in a bit of a line there that curves and follows and separates the top there from the bottom. And likewise, the underside of the beak even has a little bit of highlight there too, followed by a tiny little bit on the end as well. I can see like this kind of triangular shape in there. Awesome. Let's add in a bit more here, and it wraps over the top of this kind of hole here. I'm just trying to build up some quite bright areas here by just going over myself because I'm set to 20%. Here, there's this kind of hole here, so we just got to create like a little bit of a cut into the nose. So that should just be as simple as like a little bit of a small 1% kind of cut in here, followed by a little something here too, and maybe a little bit over this edge as well. And then zoom all the way out. Take a look at it. There's a little white dot almost in the middle, so I can just add in a little bit of a dot in there too. Awesome. And what else have we got? A few more little sort of speckles of random areas of light, so I can just boost them. I'll go 50%, little scribbles, and just have some quite nice emphasized area of highlight. All the way to the end and just connecting at the end there. If we take a look at the bird as well, we have a few sort of little areas towards the bottom as well where we start to reflect the water. So let's go ahead and set the brush size to like a 1% and just get along that kind of water's edge, just a tiny bit along the very bottom of the bird. We will come and sort of fix this in a second, but just want to add in these little sort of speckles of kind of water that are just sort of around the base or just on some of the sort of fluff of the feathers here as well. Just a little couple of light taps. You can see there's 1, 2, and then like a line, a gap. And then there's also like a little bit over here as well that looks like it kind of slopes up and then goes across like so. So it's something simple like that to a degree. I'm not quite done. No doubt, to be honest, I could probably spend a lifetime on this. I can get back here, add in lots and lots of little scrapes here and there, especially in the distance. I could set that to a 1%. I can see the general idea. I could just wiggle my pen through here and that just adds in like a bit of detail. It doesn't look like it would do, but it really does. And then of course we've got all these kind of strays off the back as well. So you can get in there and kind of, add in some stray sort of fluff of the feathers off at the back. Some little ones there too. Again, don't be afraid from this lovely white patch here, which I probably need to emphasize even more. Just kind of blend them round but with a lot of squiggles and wiggles. So for me, there's a few things that I critically want to just make sure are nice and bright. It's just here on the top of the head, and these are kind of artistic liberties. That's why I'm not really taking a look at the photograph at this stage. I want to brighten up the very top of the head. Don't need to look at the photograph for this, like so. I want to make sure, if I just bring the opacity up to like 78% as well, just triple check. I want to make sure that the top of the beak here, super nice and bright. I equally want to just have like a little bit of a brighter line under here. I want to show how sharp this area really is and how sort of detailed it is. The only other thing I equally want to do is just break down this dark patch that's on its own. So I'm going to go 50% and just lightly add in some scribbles through here to just break that down a little bit. And also there's a little bit of a tucked up bit of highlight here that I missed just underneath the outer edge of the eye. It's just there. Now at this stage, you want to go ahead and add in a reflection. So we're going to go ahead and grab our selection tool. We're going to turn off color fill. We're going to go to the option of freehand. And we are going to go ahead and draw around our duck. Super simple. Don't overthink it. Just draw all the way around it. It really doesn't matter as well if you clip into it or you add in a bit of background. It's not a big deal. We're only just going to reflect it and blur it anyway. I'm going to come down here along the base and then round to the dot and tap on the dot. Then use this option here of copy paste. It will paste it on a brand new layer, so don't worry if it's nice and dark. Grab your cursor, flip it vertically and drag it down so that the corners of either side of the bird kind of connect. Now, then tap on your cursor when you're done. Go to the layer and change its blend mode from normal to the option of multiply. It will just triple check that it is a little bit darker. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our eraser. I'm going to continue with the medium brush. I'm going to make it a bit bigger though in size, about 3%, because I need to get rid of any excess where, and I'm going to go to 100% opacity, where this reflection actually sort of goes on top of the bird. So it needs to be tucked underneath. And if you end up with this little bit of light gray, that's your indication that you're doing exactly that. You want this very light little bit of gray under here. So there's certain things in Procreate you want to just try and make sure are nice and easy, and one of which is a reflection. So you want this kind of little bit of a fuzz there underneath. Just going to break that down a tiny bit more, just taking away. I just want to make sure that the underside here is a little bit brighter on this left-hand side. And I just want to triple check that there's nothing of this kind of multiply that's getting in the way of the bird. And then from there, we're just going to go ahead first of all and go back to our eraser and change it to soft brush. Bring the size up to about 12%. Just cut across the bottom of the reflection. We don't want that massive reflection, do we? We want to keep the edges nice and clean. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our smudge tool. Of course, you can otherwise just use your finger, but just triple check your settings. Your smudge wants to probably be set to about 4% and then 44% opacity. And get in there and just smudge it horizontally as best you can. And just break it down. Like, you don't want to have like perfect reflection in here at all. And then also at the same time, when we smudge these dark tones left and right here of our reflection, it's going to equally give us some nice needed kind of water ripples almost as well, and darken up this bottom area of the design. So you can get it to the point where you've got this kind of soft, almost mirage-like area of your reflection, but you don't want to have like a perfect reflection. You want to be able to see these kind of small indicators that there's some sort of reflection there, but it doesn't want to be perfect. And then when you're done, go to your layer and then pinch the selection to the actual bird that we're working on. And then on this layer, we're going to carry on. We're going to go back to our eraser. We're going to make sure that the eraser is switched back to the medium brush. We want to go ahead and just bring the size down to like a 2%. Let's go to about let's go to 20% opacity just to start with, because what we're going to do is we're going to add in some sort of water ripple like lines here. If we take a look here, they kind of wrap around and then you end up with these lovely little lines across here. It's not necessarily something I need to be able to see, but you may need to. If we just go to like a 1 to 2%, just wrap that round that side. It's like a little bit there. And then quite harshly go like in a bit of a line across, like here, and then just draw in another one, as you can see there, kind of just comes across like so, and a little bit of kind of curving on the side. And at this stage, you can really just kind of do what you like, because it doesn't need to match up to here. We're now adding in details that we want to enjoy. Of course, there's certain sort of replication of that actual photo. So I'm going here, and then going to go ahead and bring in that water that clearly just wraps up there a little bit onto the bird. I don't know if that's obviously the direction that it's going in. Let's just go ahead and do that. And another one maybe a little bit lower down, followed by like a very light ripple of sort, like down here perhaps. And then a little bit also into the distance as well, like a few sort of water ripple lines in the background there, just a few little sort of strokes horizontally, keeping the pressure nice and light. And then go to 50% and bring your opacity, your size down, should I say, sorry, and get in there and just add in a few lines that are quite purposeful and quite sharp. Just little squiggle lines almost, just wrapping around almost the base of the bird. Leave a gap and then just say, okay, I'm gonna bring in a new one here. If that's the direction that the bird's going in, I want to see this lovely sharp line here. Go along there. And then I'm going to just sharpen up on top of some of those water ripples that we created, just with a slightly sort of darker, lighter, should I say, top to them. You can tell we end up getting into sort of the latter stages because my mind then starts to frazzle a little bit. Let's go a tiny bit here, a little kind of wiggle there of some water. I'm not trying to cover the whole base of the bird, but just enough that you can kind of get that impression. and zooming out, that looks pretty cool. I'm just going to go ahead and just add in like a little wiggle line there, followed by like another one there too. And then take a look at your bird and just see what you may or may not want to update or add, or see what other bits and bobs you can do. And to be honest, looking at that, I think the only thing I would do for me is I'd probably set my brush size to like a 1%, and I just soften this. This is looking like there's a lot of sort of feather there in like a bit of a mohawk kind of design. I want to kind of just soften that a tiny bit, get rid of a little bit more of those kind of defined lines there. But that does look pretty good, and then that looks a lot softer. I'm much happier with that. But I urge you to sit here and spend as long as you can. But for me, what I'm going to go ahead and do is just show you how to wrap this up so you can share it on socials. So what I would do is I would go to my gallery, I would back out of the canvas, I'd swipe it to the left and duplicate it. And then I'd go back into one of the canvases, because then you've got your backup in case you want to keep adding more and more. Then go ahead and first of all go to your actions and turn off your drawing guide. So go to canvas and turn off the drawing guide. Go to the option then of crop and resize. Bring this across to the midway point to just past the dark tone of the image. Hit done. It would have then cropped it to just your image. You can pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed yet another charcoal design. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. Facebook and Instagram are great for me to see your finished work. And as I mentioned, if you could subscribe to the channel, that'd be amazing. I've been posting Procreate tutorials every single week for 4 years now, and I continue to do so going forward. And of course, if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I've been posting 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters, and the catalogue sits at well over 130 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording. So if you want to get access to that catalogue, make sure to check out my Patreon using the link in the description down below. And if you liked this charcoal tutorial here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.